Chris DeRusha, you're joining us as the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. government. Your background spans prior service in the federal government, as well as in state government and elsewhere. Drawing on those experiences and your current post, what do you see as some of the key drivers of our vulnerability to cyber attacks?
So fundamentally, there was this view that bad guys could be kept out and good guys could be trusted. And that obviously was debunked pretty early on in the days of the internet, but those sort of core principles of the original design have stuck with us in a lot of ways. And that's led to this sort of fundamental principle that you can secure an environment and have a perimeter approach to, for simple terms, you get to define what a bad guy is in your own terms, but sort of keep that out.
And that's not feasible anymore?
We need to put that paradigm on its head.
What about the bad guys?
The internet simply become the most efficient and relatively consequence-free way for criminal actors to make money. And that's motivated them to get more sophisticated and find, frankly, clever ways to circumvent design flaws, if you will.
So who, to your mind, has responsibility for our cybersecurity?
When you talk about sort of core principles and sort of what's behind it, there's another decision around roles that we've made where we still often leave it up to the individual person, the individual household, the individual company, or oftentimes government agency to make their own decisions around security and how secure that they need to be and what the right sufficiency of investments are. And also, we tell them that they need to have the expertise to do that. So I think we need to think about that, right? Everything is becoming connected, everything is digital. And in the physical world, we don't have that model where everyone's responsible for kind of being secure. And so we've got to think about what that means we need to change, right? Because the consequence of this model and these decisions is starting to really play out. And, you know, frankly, if you're looking at what's happening with these massive events, supply chain attacks that are occurring in very efficient ways, you know, we really need to start taking a step back and taking a look at the whole.
So Chris, you've argued for a zero trust strategy. Can you elaborate?
So, you know, when you're thinking about what is zero trust, I mean, it's getting very granular about our trust boundaries, essentially, right? Where we're needing to treat every user, every device as risky and untrusted and manage their access to resources dynamically and intelligently. And, you know, again, as I've said, that's moving to a new paradigm where we're just saying we cannot trust the integrity of the networks that we operate on anymore. And that means establishing these confidence levels with, you know, in granular levels of visibility and control. And it also means detecting anomalous activity faster so that we can prevent harm. So these are things that we've been working on already for years in the community, but we're giving them more focus and saying that we need to be more granular in implementation and ensure that we're being precise in our implementation for these capabilities, right? And so what capabilities am I talking about? You know, we're talking about continuous multi-factor, microsegmentation, encryption, endpoint security, analytics and auditing, you know, SOAR tools, and getting good at that. So it's about establishing resilience, if you will, as the goal, is the overarching goal as opposed to prevention. And it really does involve, as I've said, many of these core security capabilities that organizations have in place. And so what we're focused on is, okay, how do we help agencies through the cultural organizational change aspects of this? Because IT security shops are going to need to start operating in a different way. And you know, in certain instances, businesses are going to be, and mission side of agencies are going to be needing to access resources in a different way. We have to have those conversations with people. We have to change the way that we understand and manage the life cycle of sensitive data and ensure that we understand where all that data is and how we're managing it in a granular fashion. And all of that impacts the general workforce and the leaders in the workforce, right? We're not doing one of those things where the security operations center can sit off to the side and just sort of monitor and no one's involved, right? It's something that's going to involve everyone. And so it will be a cultural journey change.
So what about the role of government in all this?
First and foremost, I think that we need to get away from this mentality of blaming victims and instead surge support their way. Yeah, our adversaries are taking advantage of this cultural norm that we've got. And I'm not in any way suggesting that, we're going to abdicate responsibility, or anybody should abdicate responsibility to invest in security, or that negligence of not investing where it should be will be absolved. But we need to really think this through. When you have an incident like SolarWinds and the most sophisticated security companies in the nation, arguably the world, are also victims of an attack, can you have a model where we continue to perpetuate saying that they did something wrong, right? What they did do right is they discovered it. They had good zero trust implementation, and so they found out about it and they handled it. And that is really what we're talking about. Everybody sort of needing to do. So again, I really just think that we need to kind of take a step back as these attacks are getting more and more sophisticated and really think through our responsibilities there.
Can you elaborate, especially regarding responsibilities for government and industry?
We should be thinking about how to shift our mentality about government's responsibility for protecting people from crime in the digital world, similar to how we do in the physical world. And that really needs a deep think. And certain law enforcement agencies, you see New York City leaning into this with some of the innovations that they're trying, sort of saying that they are going to take that responsibility on and providing mobile security applications for free to residents and things like that, and taking on securing public Wi-Fi. These are the beginnings of looking at how to address that question. Government and industry both have huge roles here as we share the responsibility for securing our nation's critical systems and data, right? And we all know that. That's what makes this a little bit different than some of other national security areas. And if you look at the executive order that we put out in improving the nation's cybersecurity, you're going to see several actions that we're taking to take that on and to sort of say, more about what the role of government is from our perspective. And a lot of what we're looking at is those relationships between public-private sector, and can we remove contractual barriers to sharing threat information and incident information? Sometimes those are legal barriers for companies, but can we do things with contract clauses to make change there? Can we leverage government buying power to incentivize secure software development? Can we develop these concepts forward of a software bill of materials, which could be something that maybe could be adopted nationwide if we can get these concepts right? And also establishing a cyber incident review board, which will bring together industry and government to really unpack what happens with one of these huge incidents, what lessons are being learned, and then what everyone's putting back into action based on those lessons. And so, there's a lot that we need to do to think about together when you think about the role of government in how we work closer and more impactfully with industry.
Any thoughts for those CISOs in private industry, especially with regard to educating senior management on cybersecurity?
I think so. If you think about where my job is headed, as a chief information security officer, again, when I talk about what I do, I talk about managing risk in the digital age, because I think that's where what this really is and where this field is really headed. We are dependent on IT, digital services for delivering mission. Businesses are dependent on that to make money, right? I mean, the core underpinning of everything we do now is more and more going to continue to be driven by IT. And so you simply cannot view it as an IT problem for IT people alone to solve. It's too impactful. It's too core to your mission. When you think about the security side, right? Why are we really here? Well, in the end, we're not here to drive the mission. We're here to support the mission. We're here to ensure that the mission can be completed. If you have a ransomware attack and you lose access to all your systems, you can't do that. And so that's why we're here, why we matter. And so I don't think our job is to say security first on everything. it's a risk management, risk tolerance question and decision to make based on what you do and how impactful it is and what level of assurances you need. And so, I mean, I think that executives do need to understand that. I think that we need to build this into education at all levels.
On the private sector side, in addition to avoiding disruptions to their core operations, what motivations do you see for investing in cybersecurity?
I think that that's the real interesting question is, how do we get a more secure ecosystem in place? And then what are the various incentives in play that could help us do that? And what's interesting is if you look back into the Obama administration, I think it was the 2013 timeframe, Executive Order 13636, which is funnily still rolls off the tongue because it was a pretty impactful executive order. And in there were a number of efforts, and specifically DHS, Commerce, and Treasury were tasked to develop recommendations on what they view to be useful incentives around kind of getting to the goal that you described of standardized security, particularly in critical infrastructure, right? And so some of those incentives included focusing on the insurance market, liability protections, public recognition, scoring, like I just talked about, subsidies, grants, tax incentives, voluntary versus regulatory approaches. And so I think we are at a moment where it makes sense for us to be taking a hard look at some good body of work that's already been done, some good ideas that maybe weren't ready for their time then, but could be now.
So what would be your message to the CEOs and other executive management of organizations on the responsibility for cybersecurity?
I think having a good CIO, a good CISO, and a good CTO are crucial. And these are your key advisors to any CEO and COO, CFO of an organization. But in the end, just like any major risk to your organization, you're responsible, accountable, and you really do need to understand what's behind these risks that team is managing for you. And you need to be asking those questions and making sure that they are adequately resourced to address them, and that you understand the consequences, impacts of insufficient resources, and also understand what you're going to do and what your role is going to be when managing a crisis. Because again, your CISO will do a lot of activities during a major cyber incident event, but very fast it becomes the chief executive or top official of an organization that is very much driving and organizing and managing a crisis event in cyber, just like any other crisis event.